Thanks very much, everyone, for tuning in tonight. So this is the 70th anniversary of the loss of the Princess Victoria. So I recently released, last night I released a book in Larne featuring 70 headstones. So this is a selection of 20 new to me headstones of victims of the Princess Victoria. So last year on the 69th anniversary, I did a talk, and it was quite well received. So I thought I would do another one this time on the 70th anniversary, as I say, featuring headstones that are new to me. So today I was down in Larne, and my mouse has stopped working. Sorry, bear with me. Oh, so this was last night in Larne, and this was the inaugural Princess Victoria Memorial Lecture, and there must have been stuck for people to do it because I did it. So this is the mayor introducing the talk and my book launch. As I say, 70, the final resting place of 70 victims on the 70th anniversary. So you can see the word hadn't got out that I was leading the talk because there's quite a big crowd there. So then today, this was the emotional service on the 70th anniversary down at the seafront at Larne. You can see the chain memorial there just in front of the Piper, and that's the Princess Victoria memorial down at the prom. Of course, there's a similar, there's another memorial over in Stranraer, and a slightly smaller one in the metropolis of Port Patrick. These are another couple of photographs from the launch, from the event this morning. So you can see the stage there and quite a few number of sea cadets and also folks from the RNLI and the Piper as well. Another one, this is one of the wreath laying parties. I think this is actually the relatives of victims of the Princess Victoria. They're laying their wreath there this morning. Thankfully, the weather was very fair, not like it was on the 31st of January 1953. So this is a grave which I only became aware of today, so I'll not actually talk about it in much detail, but folks told me about this grave in Larne, in Glenarm. So it's to David White Hamilton. So I saw that today. So you can see he died as a result of the Princess Victoria disaster, 31st January 1953, aged 22 years. So I'm going to rattle through 20 of them, 20 new ones to me, and it'll be going from, in terms of distance, the first ones will be in Larne, and then it'll get further away from Larne, and the 20th one will be in Enniskillen, County Fermanagh, over 100 miles away from Larne. So that's just to give you some idea of the geographical spread of the burial locations of the victims. This is the first one. This is Mary Davis Close. She was 46 years old, and she lived at Bay Park in Larne, and she was a bureau assistant on the Princess Victoria. She was last seen helping the children off the ship into one of the lifeboats, which was, as folks might know, was sadly a fruitless task, because all the women and children who got into the lifeboat were drowned when the lifeboat overturned. So there's no women and children amongst the 44 survivors. 135 men, women, and children died as a result of the disaster, and it's still to this day the largest loss of life in peacetime in the UK waters. So Mary's body was never recovered, but she's commemorated on a memorial plaque in Gardenmore Presbyterian Church in Larne, which is just beside the venue of my talk last night at the Larne Museum and Art Centre. Murray is commemorated on this headstone as lost at sea 31st January 1953. So it doesn't mention the Princess Victoria on this. So you'll see that some of the other graves, it does specify that the person died as a result of the disaster, but not in this one. And as I say, Mary's body was sadly never recovered. She's only commemorated in this headstone. And this is in Larne Town Cemetery. Also in Larne Town Cemetery, you'll see this to the left, this green section here. It's essentially unmarked. Grave to the left is McCarroll. You might be able to see that it's he's commemorated there as that lost at sea as a result of the Princess Victoria disaster. This man here, Andrew McMurdy, he's essentially in unmarked graves. There's artificial flowers and a little urn there. Yeah, but Andrew McMurdy was married to Annie with one son. He was aged 56 and he lived at 3 Drummond Street in Larne. He was a ship's carpenter under Princess Margaret, Princess Victoria's sister ship. Was travelling home for weekend leave. After service in the Great War, McMurdy had spent most of his working life at sea. When the Princess Victoria got into trouble, McMurdy had assisted the crew in their failed attempt to close the breached stern doors. He collapsed on the car deck as a result of his exertions before he was assisted back to the ship's lounge. Funeral notices to McMurdy included from the Worshipful Master, Wardens and Brethren of St. Patrick's Union Masonic Lodge 175 in Raleigh, and the members of the Larne Branch British Legion, as well as members of the 12th Battalion RIR, Royal Irish Rifles, OCA, Old Contemptibles Association. That's Andrew McMurdy, and again, that's in Larne Town Cemetery. This is also in Larne Town Cemetery, and this headstone here on the side panel, you can see from the bottom of the screen, commemorates Robert John Holden Ritchie and his date of death. And this is Robert here. He lives at 22 Newington Avenue in Larne. That's number 22 to the right of the screen. He was a butcher by trade and he served his apprenticeships at Tom Graham's Butchers in Larne. He'd been working in England and was returning home to Larne. His body was recovered by SS Clonlee off Douglas Head in the Isle of Man 5 days after the disaster. He was a member of the Orange Order, was a very keen lamb-bag drummer, also interested in pigeon racing. A family announcement in the local newspapers in the weeks following the disaster records Robert as Robert John Holden Ritchie missing, deeply mourned by his sorrowing mother and brother. So thankfully for the family, his body was recovered a number of weeks later. Now, this is Dundonald Cemetery, and I'm from Dundonald. It doesn't make me a bad person, but I was surprised to see so many victims of the disaster were buried in Dundonald. And this is one such example. Essentially, it's unmarked because it does commemorate some members of the Willis family, but not Norman. And he was a labourer, registered as living at 143 Severn Street, in other words, quite close to the Oval. And he was 22 when he died. His body was recovered by M.V. Freedor and landed at Londonderry a few days later. Norman's location of death is listed online as RAC, following sinking of M.V. Princess Victoria. There's a number of other family members, Willis family members, buried in that plot, but sadly Norman is not commemorated there. This is over to Knockbreda Cemetery. For people of a certain generation, near Supermac. For people who are slightly younger than me, near Forestside. And this commemorates 3 members of the Moore family. And you can see they're commemorated in that newspaper clipping as family that perished. And there's the 3 family members that perished, the 3 Moores. And you can see there's not much at their final resting place again. So Hubert, Martha, and 8-year-old Victor, they lived at 62 London Road. and they all died during the disaster. Hubert and Martha both worked at Short Brothers in Harland at their Wig Bay factory. That's how the two had met following the death of Martha's first husband. The family were travelling home, and Martha's father originally came to Northern Ireland originally, ironically, to work as a coast guard. So this is their home address of 62 London Road, just off the bottom of the Ravenhill Road, Belfast. And this is a number of letters and correspondence about the Moores following their deaths, following the disaster. Sadly, 8-year-old Victor's body was never recovered. So this is Carnmoney Jewish Cemetery, just slightly outside Belfast. And you can see the top of the headstone is in Hebrew. And then below it commemorates Samuel Brown, who lost his life. And then it says, "May his dear soul rest in peace, ever remembered by his loving wife, family, and relatives." This is Samuel here. He was married with 3 daughters and living at 526 Antrim Road, and that's 526 Antrim Road on the right of the screen. He was well known in the clothing trade. Was returning from a business trip to Great Britain. His body was recovered and landed in Londonderry by M.V. Frater a few days after the disaster. Samuel was associated with the Masonic Order and was a member of the R.B. Andrews Lodge and a founding member of the Shalom Lodge, with many brethren attending Brown's funeral, along with a very large attendance of relatives, business and personal friends. Short Belfast Telegraph article states that the services in the house and at the cemetery were conducted by Rabbi Shagner, M.A. And amongst the chief mourners was Sidney Gurwitch. He was a son-in-law. So folks of a certain generation will perhaps remember Gurwitch is a leading fashion outlet in Belfast, the premises and beyond, the premises at Castle Place and Royal Avenue. So I think that Samuel had married into the Gurwitches. So this is still in Carnmoney Cemetery, but not the Jewish section. This is in the main section, and this it's hard to read, but it commemorates James and Helen McGill. They had addresses in both Port Patrick and Whitewell Drive in Belfast, and only been married 3 months before their deaths. 35-year-old Helen hailed from Blackley in Manchester, whilst John was a senior inspector with Short Brothers in Harland at their Wig Bay factory and was well known in motorcycling circles in Northern Ireland. John's body was recovered by the coastal vessel Snow Queen. So you can see from that clip also John was a member of the Hertford Masonic Lodge number 54. And this is their house here at Greencastle, County Antrim. The next one then is back to Larne, and this is the McGarrell Cemetery. And folks who know the McGarrell Cemetery can spot the little building there, top left, with the headstone there at the base of that, the photographs to the left. So the close up to the right, it commemorates James Main. So he was an assistant steward on the vessel, and this is him here, and he lived at Curran Street in Larne. He was originally a carriage builder. He served during World War II with the Royal Navy. I was the holder of the Burma Star. He was a member of the Larne British Legion, and the death notice stated that the officers and members of MISPA RPB number 88 express their deep sympathy to their esteemed member, Sir Knight Thomas Main, and the loss of his son, and to the several other members who have suffered bereavement through the sinking of RMS Princess Victoria. Home is the sailor. So a further notice records James's missing younger son of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Main, 35 Barn Hill, Larne, deeply regretted. James's body was washed up on the south coast of the Isle of Man a few days after the disaster. This is back in the Glenarm, where, as I mentioned, the one earlier. that are only discovered today. And this is James Arthur Morrow. And you can see at the top of the headstone there, he's commemorated when he was aged 33. This is James here in both these photographs. He was a single man. He lived at Rodden's Lane in Larne at the time of his death. He was formerly in business, first in Larne and then in Glenarm, and he returned to the sea, attached to the Princess ships for several years as a steward and then as a bursar on the Princess Margaret. James was survived by a brother and sister living in a hovel in Carnalbana. The death notice from Carnalbana Flute Band stated that the members regret the death of James A. Morrow, missing result of Princess Victoria disaster, brother of their esteemed member Thomas A. Morrow, and extend to him and other members of the family their sincere sympathy. So he was only aged 33. This is on Island Magee. This is Ballypriormore burying ground. It's hard to read, but it commemorates this man, Alexander, known as Sandy McCready. He was age 61. He lived at Hillmount in Ballylumford in Island Magee. He was married to Isabella with a son also called Sandy. He was employed as a quartermaster on the Princess Victoria's sister ship, Princess Margaret, and he was travelling home as a passenger on weekend leave. During World War II, McCready was the quartermaster in the city of Manchester, which, when she was torpedoed off Java, he was then held as a prisoner of war for 3.5 years. Death notice following the Princess Victoria disaster stated, the Worshipful Master, officers and brethren of Island Magee, LOL, Loyal Orange Lodge, 1962, regret the death of their esteemed member, brother Alexander McCready, lost in Princess Victoria, and tender sincere sympathy to his wife and family. Further notice from the Marine Bar Dart Club in Whitehead stated that the club wished to extend their deepest sympathy to their fellow member Sandy McCready on the death of his father in Princess Victoria disaster. So this is, the next one then is Anne Jackson, MBE, and this is Kirkhill Cemetery at Kells in County Antrim. Anne was a senior Inspector of Domestic Science for the Ministry of Education, and she lived at Eglinton Avenue, Belfast, and she attended Fisherwick Presbyterian Church. She was returning from a conference in Edinburgh. She had been awarded an MBE for her work in 1945. Anne's body washed ashore a week after the disaster at Withorn Bay in Wigtonshire. At her funeral, the Reverend Withers stated that Annie was a woman of character and courage, whose personality bound people to her in an unending friendship. So you can see on her headstone to the right there, the close-up, it commemorates Anne, and it says, whose body was found at Withorn Bay, Wigtonshire, and interred in this family grave, essentially 5 to 6 weeks after the loss of the Princess Victoria. So the next one is this one. This is Ballymena Cemetery. This is the final resting place of Elizabeth Crawford. So you can see the grave, sadly, is completely unmarked. So there's a number of victims of the disaster whose graves are unmarked, especially in Dundonald Cemetery. But I would really like to be able to put something up, a little plaque even on each of the graves that are currently unmarked, like Elizabeth Crawford's here in Ballymena. So she was in her late 40s and married to David with 3 daughters and 1 son. She lived at 42 Galgorm Street in Ballymena, and she was employed as a housekeeper outside the town. She was returning from a trip to Cairnryan, where she was visiting her husband, who was a captain in the Pioneer Corps. So also buried in an unmarked grave is William McLenaghan. So he's buried in, as you can see from this headstone in the middle, interred in Carryduff Cemetery, where his where his grave is unmarked, but he is commemorated on his parents' grave, which is in Saintfield, so not too far away. This is 28-year-old William, and he was employed as a charge hand electrician with the Short brothers in Harland at their Wig Bay factory, where he had worked for most of his life. I think there was 21 folks working in the Wig Bay factory who perished as a result of the disaster. William, or Billy as he was known, had married his wife Eleanor only 10 months before his death, and Eleanor was expecting the couple's first child. Billy was a regular golfer, also playing for Sainfield Cricket Club and Sainfield Hockey Club. As the ship sunk, Billy jumped into the water, but a lifeboat was unable to pick him up. Amongst the numerous family notices in the Belfast Telegraph, he's remembered as the eldest and dearly loved son of William and Helen McClenaghan, and dearly loved husband of Eleanor. Separate notices from 4 different uncles and aunts, as well as a further notice stating that he was deeply regretted by his sorrowing father-in-law, mother-in-law, and sisters-in-law. So it's sad that whilst he's commemorated in Sainfield, his final resting place in Carryduff is unmarked. So this is the final resting place of David Francie. He's commemorated or he's buried at Desert Lynn, St. John's, Church of Ireland churchyard at Moneymore. He was aged 20. He was from the town or the village. He qualified as a radio operator from the Marine Radio College in Eglantine Avenue in Belfast, and he'd been posted to the MV Empire Wansbeck, based in Hull. He had decided to pay a short visit home whilst the ship was undergoing sea trials. So sadly, he perished trying to get back home for a surprise visit to his family in Moneymore. As you can see there from the headstone, he was aged only 20. The next one is in Ringsend Roman Catholic graveyard, Ringsend being between Garva and Coleraine. This is Rosemary Mullen, and she was one of 11 children, and she was aged 21. She was a student nurse at Warlington Park Hospital in Surrey, and she was returning home to see her parents. She had been a nurse since 1951, in other words, since for the last couple of years. And Rosemary was making the trip in January, as she had been unable to return home at Christmas due to work commitments. And you'll see at the base of the grave there a little bit of Irish. So the next one then is in Ballyhalbert on the Orange Peninsula. And again, it's quite hard to read, but near the base, it commemorates William Gowan, lost on board Princess Victoria, aged 26 years. This is William here, and as you can see in this newspaper clipping, he's commemorated as among last to leave ship. So he was a carpenter in the Princess Victoria, and he came from Portavogie and was married with a 4-year-old son called Billy. William, also known as Billy, had trained at Harland Wolff before going to sea in 1946 after completing his apprenticeship. In 1951, he was shipwrecked when the pirate city broke her back off the coast of Spain. William was due to finish his time at sea in February 1953, in other words, the very next month, the very next day, in fact, after the 31st of January, to resume his employment at Harland Wolff. So, very tragic story of William Gowan. So the next one then is up near Limavady, St. Matthew's Roman Catholic graveyard at Drumcerne, Limavady. You can see the headstone to the left commemorates my dear son Francis Mullen, lost in MV Princess Victoria, 31st January 1953, aged 28 years. He was a sergeant in the Royal Irish Fusiliers, having served for 7 years. He was travelling home from his posting in East Africa on compassionate leave to visit his ill mother, who was living at Ballymully, outside Limavady. And Frank was then to be transferred to the Omagh barracks. His family were unaware that he was returning home until they were informed that he was missing. Mullen's body was found along with that of Edmund Freel in a Princess Victoria lifeboat which was washed up at Kearney Point near Portaferry 3 days after the sinking of the ship. That suggests, sadly, that perhaps Edmund and Francis Frank had survived the sinking, but perished after the disaster, perhaps from exposure. The Requiem Mass was celebrated by the Reverend G. O'Neill from Dungiven, followed by a service at the graveside when 2 NCOs, non-commissioned officers, and a bugler from the regimental depot in Omagh represented the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers and the last post, and the reveille were sounded. The chief mourners were recorded as Sergeant Mullins' 4 brothers, David, Harry, Bernard, and Joseph, and his brothers-in-law, Thomas Guy and Patrick Douglas. So this is up Portstewart in County Londonderry, and this is the final resting place. It's Ackerton Cemetery. The final resting place of John Wilton. He was 22, and he was from Enfield Street in Portstewart. He was a leading telegraphist on HMS Sea Eagle in Londonderry. He was educated at Coleraine Technical College, and he played for the school football team as a member of the Portrush Sea Cadets. Unbeknown to his parents, John had travelled to a naval hospital in England and was returning to his posting when he lost his life. He's commemorated on a striking headstone featuring an anchor on either side as our beloved son, John Alexander Eltel, Lieutenant, leading telegraphist, Royal Navy, who perished in the Princess Victoria disaster 31st January 1953, aged 22 years. This is the penultimate one. This is up to Derry City Cemetery, and this is the final resting place of this man, Dudley Kipling. He was a native of Ware in Suffolk, and he served with the 1st contingent from the 7th City of London Battalion in the Great War, sustaining a gunshot wound to the right thigh on 25th September 1915. During the Second World War, he served with the Ulster Home Guard as an intelligence officer, and he was a member of the Londonderry Rotary Club and also a distant relation of Rudyard Kipling. He worked for Welsh Markinson and Company, who were shirt and collar manufacturers from 1906. He transferred to the company's Derry premises in 1939, and at the time of his death, he was returning from a business trip to England, having been joint local director of the company since the start of the decade. His fellow director, A.R. Lowry, had safely returned from the same business trip by Heysham on the Friday night. Kipling was married with a daughter and 2 sons, one of whom was killed in the Second World War. He's commemorated on the headstone where his father's buried, but he's not actually buried there. Dudley Kipling Jr. enlisted with the Royal Enniskillen Fusiliers, subsequently joined an officer cadet training unit in India. He was attached to the 1st Battalion West Yorkshire Regiment with the rank of lieutenant when he was killed in action on 6th April 1945, aged 21, and is buried in the Tokyan War Cemetery in Myanmar or Burma. At the time of his death, the family home was at Caw Villa, Cluny Road in Derry. The last one then is this one. You can see that the death notice at the top commemorates David Galanders, only son of Samuel and Sarah Galanders, in Enniskillen. Funeral was from Belfast to Braindrum Cemetery, and that's the grave, the headstone there. It's a bit of a close up. He's commemorated as David Galanders, who was called home suddenly, 31st January 1953, aged 27 years. So again, it doesn't say anything about Princess Victoria on that headstone. He was a civil servant, was David, living in Benton in Northumberland, and he was travelling home to see his family at Charnville and then Enniskillen, visit his mother. So that's the furthest headstone out of the new discoveries. Just slightly over 100 miles away from Larne, where the ferry was due to the dock. We'll finish with this great photograph. It shows you a victim, sorry, not a victim, a survivor, James Blair, and the nurse is Nancy Lennox from Kilrea, and she is administering some cutting edge first aid there to James in his hospital bed. And today I had the privilege of meeting James's son, and that's him at one of the exhibitions beside the photograph of his father with Nurse Lennox. So Robert, sorry, he lives in Coleraine now, so it was an honour to meet him and to hear about his dad. He survived the disaster, since now died. So this is the definitive work on the loss of the Princess Victoria, Stephen Cameron's excellent book about the disaster. A lot of information and interest that I have in the disaster came as a result of reading Stephen's book. So it's quite hard to get now, but if you do see it, it's definitely worth investing in. I say it's the definitive work on the disaster. This is my not so definitive work on the disaster, as I launched last night, and thankfully all of the copies of the first one have gone, but I will be getting more of them soon. And the book's called Where Terror Came by Sea, and as you can see there, it says 70 graves of victims of the Princess Victoria disaster 70 years on, and there's a little image on the front of a life raft floating, and it says a silent witness floats empty from the disaster scene. So this is where the title came from, this quite shocking image, not in Northern Ireland, it's in Sheerness, Dockyard in Kent. Shows you the force of the gale which led to the loss of Princess Victoria. You can see that ship is turned right over in the dock, and you can see as well the death toll particularly in Holland was very high. So there's the image of the life raft from the front of the book. It says a silent witness float empty from the disaster scene 30 miles south of Belfast Lough. A lonely raft drifts empty, a silent witness of the disaster which has shocked the country. That's all, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in.